Four Catholic bishops who are Cuban-Americans say they support the ongoing protests in the island nation against its communist government. In a statement yesterday, the church leaders said in part, quote, "The right and courage of the people in Cuba to raise their voice publicly, casting away their fear of repression and revealing authentic solidarity as a people are acknowledged and applauded." The statement is signed by Archbishop Perez of Philadelphia, Bishop Felipe Estevez of St. Augustine, Bishop Manuel Cruz, Auxiliary Bishop of Newark, and Bishop Octavio Cisneros, Auxiliary Bishop Emeritus of Brooklyn. And joining us now with analysis is Alejandro Bermudez, Executive Director of the CNA Aussie Group. Alejandro, welcome back. Always so good to be with you. As you know, not only have there been protests in Cuba, but protests have also been taking place here in the U.S., especially in Florida, where some protesters even blocked an expressway. So a lot of support, as we know, for the Cuban people. Let's talk about that and why.
Well, basically, this is a completely unprecedented event, Tracy. In the 60 years that the communist dictatorship has ruled Cuba, only once something similar happened when during the 80s, the Soviet Union collapsed and Cuba did not have financial support. But it was nothing of this kind. We're now talking not hundreds, but thousands of people from the east to the west of the island, all exploding at the same time on last Sunday. That's totally unprecedented, and I understand the hope and the energy with which the Cuban-American bishops have reacted to this. Also, this is a crucial moment for Cuba, and unprecedented for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I know, you know this, of course, that more than half the people in Cuba are Catholic. But, you know, what role and how much of a role does the Catholic Church play in that country? And also, back in 2015, Pope Francis, as we know, visited Cuba. What type of impact do you think that had on the Cuban people? And do you think maybe it had any influence on what we're seeing now?
Definitely it has. We have to keep in mind that the Cuban bishops depend completely for operational reasons. I mean, the minimum of the pastoral work they do depends 100% on the quote-unquote generosity of the government. Like, if you want to transport seminarians from their houses to the seminary, the gasoline that van has is provided, you know, drop by drop, in a very controlled manner by the government. So the bishops have had a reasonable, but obviously expectantly so, very moderate statement right now. But the Catholic faith is a different thing. I mean, the emblematic role that plays the National Marian Advocation, Our Lady of Charity, which, as you probably remember, Tracy, was visited both by Pope John Paul and by Pope Benedict, and both said this is the heart of Cuba. And it was. Many of the protests, including one in Havana, saw the population basically marching under the image of Our Lady of Charity. So definitely, the faith is a tremendous source of hope, and probably the only one, because the situation of Cuba right now is just miserable. I mean, miserable considering the lack of anything that you can imagine, from food to medicines, to the spike of COVID in this month of July.
Yeah, it really is. It's so hard to imagine. What do you think is going to happen next? What do you think we're going to see next in Cuba?
Well, we will definitely are seeing and will see a tremendous amount of repression. You know, the President Diaz-Canel kind of explained his thinking about this when he went to radio and television on Sunday after he was surprised by the protest. And what he said is, number one, this is all the fault of the U.S. You know, the United States is creating these protests via social media. And number two, calling the so-called, you know, quote-unquote revolutionaries to go out to the streets to fight the protesters. So basically calling for a civil war. Now, that didn't happen, but short term, definitely the Cuban government has the army and the type of extremely militarized police to repress this. But that is going to be a temporary solution because the key problem, which is the total lack of food, of medicine, of a questionable vaccine that has been invented by Cuba. You know, it's a 3-dose vaccine that hasn't been tested by any independent organizations and which Cubans do not want to take. So the extreme dire conditions are not going to change. So if we see a short-term repression that brings, you know, kind of a silence to the streets, it's definitely going to be just temporary.
Well, Alejandro, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your analysis. I know you'll be continuing to follow this, as will we. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.